Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your kind words. And let me say how happy the FIU is to present at this level. We feel very close with the Integrity Commission as we form part of the entire construct. And so this morning we take great pleasure in discussing the topic at hand. I'll go straight ahead in sharing my screen once the technical person allows me. Once you allow me to share my screen, technical operator, I would then make the co-host and I would share my screen.
Yes, you have the ability to share your screen.
All right, so thank you very much. So we will discuss innovation in financial investigation and of course, asset recovery. We'll just examine some of the objectives that we'll attempt to do. Of course, within the time limit, we'll go until just around 20 to 12 when we'll allow you to ask your questions. So we'll attempt to discuss effective financial investigations infrastructure. We'll also identify tools necessary to successfully investigate financial crimes. We will discuss the value of networking and agency cooperation. We will have a bit of discussion on asset recovery. And finally, we will examine one of our sanitized cases. So financial investigation is, of course, a complex matter. And it requires a different kind of infrastructure when you compare it to other forms of investigation. And of course, one of the important tenets of that infrastructure would be investigators with the requisite skill set. Although it's investigation and it requires similar tenets of investigation as interview, maybe questioning, maybe searches and so on, you want a group of investigators with a certain kind of skill set that will be able to unearth complex cases. Intelligence gathering, having that capacity is extremely important. And later down in the presentation, we will speak to how we can gather intelligence and how we can make use of different kinds of agencies that can be extremely useful. But intelligence gathering, extremely important. And there are a number of sources that you can use for intelligence gathering. So for example, the FIU in Grenada and many other FIUs have the responsibility or the mandate to get certain reports from financial institutions and other entities. So that's, of course, a source that you'll be able to get and gather intelligence. Intelligence, of course, is the initial stage, and as you go on, that can be translated into some kind of evidence that may be able to be used for court purposes. Having an appropriate legislative infrastructure is extremely important. Having an agency empowered and having the necessary tools via your legislation, your local legislation is extremely important. How your local legislation allows you to interface with foreign entities, for example, sharing information or receiving requests for information, or even having a more loose relationship, and also having an opportunity and a line that you can make formal requests, extremely important. And of course, having that strong infrastructure, that strong legislative infrastructure allows you to do that kind of work. Bearing in mind too that financial investigation normally cross borders, and so it requires deep into other jurisdictions. Although you may have some kind of informal relationship, you really require to have legislation that allows you to do certain things. And even locally, it requires sometimes having an MOU or having some other kind of instrument that allows you to share information at that level. So even if you have requisite investigative skills and you have intelligence gathering capacity and you do not have the legislative backing, the technical backing, then you run into difficulties. Having a platform for networking, extremely important, and we'll go into that as we go lower down, but of course, no one agency can adequately investigate a financial crime based again on its complexity. And so it requires networking, stretching longer, making your arms longer, being able to interact with other agencies that we'll discuss as we go ahead. And of course, agency cooperation, extremely important because it means that you need to draw not only information, but you can draw skills. You can share skills. In our jurisdiction that are relatively smaller, we do not have the kind of resources to necessarily have all the skills in one place. So having, having been able to cooperate with other agencies, even within your jurisdiction, is an extremely important feature that allows you to lend resources, to transfer skills, to be able to successfully investigate a financial crime. So you may not necessarily have a forensic accountant, but if that accountant resides in another entity, another public entity or otherwise, or even in the private sector, you can obviously loan that kind of skill set to foster greater success. So agency cooperation and networking, extremely important. We will discuss some of the tools of the trade. Of course, search warrants important. And again, it really speaks to the kind of power that an investigative agency has. And if you don't necessarily have that power by itself, you can learn from other resources. But search warrants, one of the tools that you will search to get documentation, maybe to raise IT equipment, and otherwise, even to engage in going into a cell phone use kind of warrant. Interviews are extremely important. It requires a certain kind of finesse, certain kind of skill to interview someone with respect to a financial crime. It's different to other crimes. It requires some know-how and some skills in that area. Seizure orders are extremely important so that you have that initial power to seize money, for example. But of course, you would need to make that formal application within a certain time frame. In the Grenada context is 72 hours. But after that, you would have to get that appropriate court order to continue to hold on to those funds. Forfeiture orders, again, extremely important that when you're going into the direction of asset recovery, when you're applying for those kinds of orders. And of course, we have two regimes. We have the criminal regime and we also have a pretty good civil forfeiture regime. So we can use either one based on the kind of information or evidence we have at our fingertips. Confiscation orders, again, can be used. And of course, mutual legal assistance requests and that instrument to communicate with foreign entities, extremely important because it's a legislative mandate to rely on that official instrument to request information and sometimes to transfer information. So extremely important. Grenada fortunately has several pieces of instruments that allow us to share and to act on behalf of entities. An extremely important tenet of asset recovery has to do with sharing of assets. Let's suppose monies are moved through money laundering and it requires sharing of assets. That will be an extremely important instrument that you may have to rely on. So there are other tools, but I just mentioned those that I believe that we can discuss, we'll be discussing as we go through the presentation. So I want to begin by discussing a little bit that networking agency cooperation. The diagram you're looking at is just one that we put together to show the interconnectivity and the value of that when it comes to financial crime investigation. Because you see, financial crimes are not necessarily straightforward. They normally come through, for example, a financial institution may file a suspicious activity report, right? And what is that? That really refers to a report that doesn't meet the threshold of that client or member or business partner doesn't meet the threshold of what is considered to be a normal. So anything outside of what is normal must spark a suspicious activity report. That is a mandate by all reporting entities, and that includes financial institutions. It includes DNFBPs, designated non-financial businesses and professions. They all have a responsibility to file what we call SARs, or suspicious activity report. So that, of course, is an important partner. And of course, filing of SAR, notwithstanding it is a legislative mandate, of course, it requires some time and some confidence, and it takes a period before the institutions, though they're mandated to, but it requires added cushioning for them to feel comfortable in sharing that kind of information. Because outside of that formal sharing, you must also be able to develop some partnership with respect to sharing information informally. That is important for speed and so on. So financial institutions, DNFBPs, extremely important in the scheme of things when it comes to networking and cooperating. Anti-corruption bodies. Bearing in mind that we, in this construct now, anti-corruption bodies hold quite a bit of data, extremely important data, that may become important in a financial crime scenario. Also a partner, because the FIU would obviously make known certain well, things that might be public that the anti-corruption body may need to take cognizance of, that can now trigger off some kind of work on their part, bearing in mind what is happening on the ground. So an extremely important partner, not only for because of the legislative capabilities, but of course what they're about fighting corruption. And if you may, a lot of financial crimes, really, anything that produces dirty money has the capability to become an instrument of bribery. So there is a tight-knitted collaboration between financial crimes and the work of the anti-corruption bodies. Of course, law enforcement agencies, and I will say why. I mean, in the greater context, we have a law enforcement type FIU, but of course, there are other law enforcement agencies that are the repository for quite a bit of information and have their own skill set that can become extremely important when it comes to investigating financial crimes. Regional and international partners, the importance cannot be overstated. Having that network through the regional and international really gives life to any successful financial investigation. Bearing in mind that we're part of a global financial space and money flows in and out, if you don't have connectivity, then you could never be really successful, except you're just acting within a jurisdiction. But knowing the nature of how money moves and services move, having a strong partnership with the international community, extremely important. The FIU is part of the Egmont Group, which is an elite group of FIUs. You would see it as you peruse, for example, the Financial Action Task Force 40 recommendations of the value of being part of the Egmont Group. And so these are some of our partners, but of course we have the power to engage different entities with, of course, with similar trust. So we can actually engage in some kind of partnership. Open sources, I listed them as part of the network group because, of course, those of us who are practitioners recognize that there is major value in the information that circulates, that you don't have to do anything special to get is out there on the internet, Facebook, the newspaper, extremely important. Paying attention to the discussion, having a role on Facebook, for example, you get to see, for example, maybe the life that someone might be perpetrating, and you can garner a lot of information from that kind of activity. So there's a lot of information available in an area that we have to pay nothing for. You on the internet, you go on the internet and you could see so many things that could be extremely valuable. Informants, again, those that are maybe by virtue of a job they they provide information, or you can inculcate them during your work. And people always have something to say, right? People spontaneously say things. They might be seeing a new structure going up. They might see someone explain wealth. A financial investigator takes cognizance of this kind of information that just buzzes around. Extremely important. The lead agency would represent the FIU or other name agency that has primary mandate to investigate financial crimes, complex financial crimes such as money laundering and terrorist financing. So the lead agency forms part of that entire circle and that networking. Now, there might be other partners, but we just chose those main ones. Civil society, the public could have been added because they play a major role in just generally scrutinizing, questioning, making inquiries, and even making reports of some sort. All right, so I wanted to just discuss the value of networking and agency cooperation, understanding that even if an agency holds the responsibility to investigate a financial crime, they must take cognizance of the value of the other stakeholders within that circle. And of course, stating their importance, having a relationship makes it even better, so that people would spontaneously speak, people would spontaneously inquire. Of course, this particular event here speaks loudly on how we can conduct training together, we can learn from each other, even when we have our specific roles. We can find us to be a sort of melting pot where we can garner from each other and just improve our capacity in a general and more precise way. I wanted to kind of talk about a specialized agency because, of course, there are various schools of thought on whether or not it should be just a general law enforcement responsibility, or when it comes to financial crimes, whether there should be a specialized agency to treat with financial crimes. And I support this notion, and I want to just discuss it a bit. Of course, there are different schools of thought. People may feel differently about it, but because of the complex nature of financial crimes, it really requires certain kind of skill set, as I spoke about. And of course, if we have a specialized agency, that capacity can be constantly and consistently been built and become stronger. And so you're in always a better position to treat with the complexities and to stay abreast with the complexity and the trends that emanates from financial crime. Of course, the skills, the cutting-edge skills would reside there because you have an opportunity to build skills that may not necessarily be as common or maybe more widespread. You have it concentrated in a particular area. And of course, you would want, as I discussed in the former aside, that lead agency with certain capabilities to lead on. Although, might I say again, that it requires a joint effort. Financial crimes really requires a joint effort to be successful. And I will discuss that further, and you will see what I'm speaking about, that value of that joint effort. One of the important tenets of financial crime, or product of it, is the issue of asset recovery. Taking the profit out of crime is the most important part of financial crime investigation, right? There is no value in somebody going to jail or paying a fine and the property that emanated from the criminal activity remain with them. That would be a massive failure in any country or in any organization. The whole idea behind empowering a particular agency or empowering law enforcement, or the fact that we can come together as a unit in that circle, is really to suck the profit out of crime, all right, and to leave people without the niceties and the buildings and the vehicles and the cash that they got from their criminal activity. So asset recovery is really that, tracing and freezing and confiscating and actually returning. Important. Restitution is extremely important. Returning to the lost party or having it go to a state-owned grouping that can now use it for fighting crime. So for example, in the Grenada context, we have what we call the confiscated asset fund, that this kind of funds can go into, and then in turn is used to support the Anti-Money Laundering Commission. It is used in many cases to assist with maintaining vehicles and training and so on. So really, you find a way to use the monies that was intended for criminal activity. The importance of recovering assets cannot be overstated, because once those assets remain available, then bribery becomes one of the things that could be done. And so we want to take the profit out of crime. According to United Nations, countries lose between $20 and $40 billion each year. That can really be directed to bribery and misappropriation of funds, and really available to corrupt public officials and the likes. So a large part of the business of a financial investigator, and it's not a new phenomenon, but of course it has become a lot more obvious now that when you do a financial investigation, you don't stop at an arrest or imprisonment, you go further to take the profit out of crime. A lot of our focus, and the region of the world has gone into asset recovery. That is why the civil forfeiture regime has been developed quite a bit, even Grenada, and so can be used to further that work of asset recovery. Extremely important part of financial crimes. In the Grenada context, we have what we call a unit within the FIU that is dedicated to asset recovery. And that is why I spoke earlier about that specialized agency that can house that kind of activity, that can focus on asset recovery. So every case we have, every case that comes to the notice of the FIU, every case that has been investigated would have to interface with asset recovery unit. They will look to see all possibilities of whether or not any property, any value came out of that criminal activity. So it is much more difficult to house that kind of specialized agency within a wider law enforcement construct. All right, so I want to just for a few minutes look at the issue of one of our sanitized cases. I thought I would use that to sort of drill on some of the issues that were raised and show how it can be used successfully in a financial crime investigations. We call this one the Green Beltway. Really, it speaks to the movement of cannabis from a certain country to Grenada, and the movement of funds from Grenada to a certain country. That is the basis for the case. So I will just go through the case and talk about it a little bit. Right, so what you are seeing is a link chat that speaks a bit to some of the activity that emanated from the case. Let me just say that that particular case emanated from a suspicious activity report from one of the reporting entities. And of course, once you receive such a report, it's analyzed and then immediately goes into that notion of ensuring that whether or not there are other links that can be attached to that particular activity. So in that case, what you are seeing is started with movement of money. And of course, after analysis and further investigation, that is the chart that just part of the operation that came through, that was put together by the office, by our analysts, and really spoke to maybe over 200 and something thousand EC dollars moving through that one person, right? And of course, that is as a result of the cannabis trade, and those monies was repatriated to that certain country. But looking at the chart, you recognize the value of having the correct tools during our financial crime investigation. I can assure you, if we were doing this on paper, it would be far difficult. Those practitioners who have done link charts on paper would know how daunting it is to do this. And so having the appropriate tool, the IT background would enable you to do that kind of link. And what it does, it brings the story much clearer and you realize that the figures there are all representing people at different levels, closer and further away from the center, which gives a sort of pictorial view of what is happening with respect to this particular case. But having done that, I just want to show how we use the issue of networking and cooperation successful in this case, because what happened, we engage other law enforcement entities. Of course, we made the necessary requests from the various financial institutions, and all that added to the development of such a chart, and engaging law enforcement entities extremely important. Operations, of course, were planned, and the long and short is that we were able to successfully carry out searches. We were able to lift narcotics in the process. We preferred charges of money laundering, and we are looking now. We issued restraining orders, and we're looking also to do a confiscation down the road. And that is just part of the operation. So right before us, we are seeing a case that started from one of our stakeholders, though it's a legislative mandate, but came from them. And that spiraled out into a far bigger platform that created what you're seeing before you there. And I'm really just commenting the success of that particular case. Now, products of financial investigations, of course, evidence, of course, arrest, restitution, important, monies going back or property going back to the rightful owner, and of course, asset recovery as a mainstay of part of that product that you expect. Now, I want to speak about our value-added product as well. Of course, crime prevention, if you are able to successfully investigate a financial crime all the way from start to finish, and finish, I'm speaking about some kind of asset recovery and restitution. It means, therefore, that you can use that as a story to assist to prevent that particular crime, maybe in the entity, or just as a means of informing the public of the typologies and the trend that might be taking place. Of course, we don't just look at an investigation for arrest purposes. Of course, that is punishment is an important part of what we look to, asset recovery, restitution, but we also look at gathering useful data that help us to develop certain products as strategic analysis. And really, it really speaks to putting data together where you can now inform institutions and the public on specific trends as relates to that particular kind of crime. Of course, it informs the international community, and it shows that you're on top of what is actually happening. So there's so much that can be garnered from investigating a financial crime. I think important to note is the issue of collaboration and cooperation, and issue of asset recovery, extremely important, and then being able to produce useful tools that can be used. It is important that we speak as well at the issue of cooperation, being able to use resources from various entities. The fact that we are small and budgets might be low as well, but really we're getting the best out of what we have. And normally it's right or wrong, it's just the ability to pool resources together and get the best out of the entire group. So I would stop here at this time. I will allow you to ask questions. If you do have questions, I will gladly respond the best way I can.